What's up guys, it's Flowjector Coasters here. Today I'm going to be doing the top 10 coasters at Kings Island. I've been at this park 3 times since moving to Dayton, Ohio, so I think I have a pretty good feel for all of the roller coasters there. Except I have not ridden Adventure Express, Woodstock Express, the Great Pumpkin Coaster, or Flying Ace Aerial Chase, but those will be honorable mentions. I really don't want to ride those rides ever, and I probably won't ride them ever, just because when I go to Kings Island, I don't really want to waste my time riding those, and I want to spend my time riding the better rides like Diamondback, Orion, and Mystic Timbers. So let's get on with the video. First, let's start out with the honorable mentions. Like I said, I haven't ridden any of these rides, but I'm putting them here because they deserve a spot in this list. First up, we have the Great Pumpkin Coaster. This is a kiddie coaster with a pretty basic layout, so it doesn't really deserve to be higher than the last place spot. But there's nothing really to say here, it's just a kiddie coaster. Now let's move on to the next coaster. Next up, we have Flying Ace Aerial Chase. This is higher than the Great Pumpkin Coaster because it has a more exciting layout and it's taller and faster, except I've heard this is a rough ride and a headbanger, so that's why it's not higher in this list. Next up, we have Woodstock Express. This is a PTC family wooden coaster, and it looks like a pretty fun ride. It has like a pop of airtime or so, and it's wooden, which makes it unique in a way. The final coaster on the honorable mentions is Adventure Express. This is an aero mine train, but it looks like it has a pretty boring layout, and I've heard from some friends it's not worth riding, so I'll take their advice. Taking the number 10 spot, we have the Premier Rides launch coaster called Flight of Fear. This ride was actually pretty terrible, and I did not like it one bit. The launch was okay, but then right after the launch, a bunch of trim brakes slowed down the momentum into the Cobra roll. Also, all of the transitions were rough and painful. The restraints hurt my foot, and I couldn't breathe the whole ride. Also, just to top it off, the mid-course brake run hit really hard, and the whole ride was slowed down after that. The pacing is terrible, it's rough, and it's painful. I would say don't ride this unless you're really into old, terrible launch coasters. Now let's move on to the number 9 spot. We have Invertigo, a Vekoma inverted boomerang. I thought this ride was really enjoyable. It was smooth and pretty intense, and I don't understand why people don't like this ride. I know it's a clone, but it's a pretty good clone, and since I haven't ridden any other boomerangs, I don't really realize that it's a clone, if that makes any sense. The ride begins with a backwards lift hill, which is pretty fun, then it goes into a drop. This drop doesn't really do anything, but it's cool when it goes through the station because it's super loud. The Cobra roll is pretty intense, and to my surprise, it had no headbanging. After the Cobra roll, you go into a vertical loop, which is really intense. Then you go back up into another spike, and a chain lift brings you to the very top. This spike is kind of cool because you're going up backwards and you don't know what's about to happen. Then it drops you without waiting at all, which my parents didn't like. They thought it should wait a bit, but I'm okay with that. Then you go everything backwards again. I like the backwards part better than the first part because it's just cool to do stuff backwards, except it's slightly less intense. That just might be me though. Then it goes through the station again and goes back to a spike, and then it slowly rolls you back to the station. I like this ride a lot, and I don't understand why it gets so much hate. It's a fun ride, even though it's a clone, it's a fun clone. So let's move on to the number 8 spot. At number 8, we have the Bat. This is an aero suspended coaster, and I make sure to ride it every time I go to Kings Island because it's a fun, smooth ride that's actually pretty intense for what it is. It's located in the back of the park, and no one can really see it, so it never has a long line. That's why I like riding it the most. Once you get to the top of that slow lift hill, you make a also slow right-hand turn, which takes you into the drop. In this turn, you get a great view of Great Wolf Lodge and the surrounding area in the forest, and some of the other park. After this right-hand turn, you go down the drop. This drop is excellent in the back row because you get whipped down, but in the front, it's just okay. After the drop, you go into a right-hand turn near the ground. This turn is really fun because it offers some positive G's. Then you go up into a left-hand turn, which makes you swing a lot, into another right-hand turn, which is also low to the ground. These turns are actually pretty intense and make you swing a lot, which is always fun. I wish this ride was like Banshee and your feet were dangling because that would be cool, but it's an old aero, so it doesn't do that. After a bunch of other turns, the ride comes to an end, and it's a pretty short one, but I always make sure to ride it because it's a fun one. This ride is awesome, and I totally recommend it when you go to Kings Island. Next up, at the number 7 spot, we have the Beast. I know a lot of people are really mad at me right now, because some people love the Beast, and would put it actually at the number 1 spot at all of Kings Island, but I just don't. It's not terrible. I still put it over other rides like the Bat and Vertigo and Flight of Fear, but it's not very good either. Let me explain. First of all, it's unbearably rough. The whole ride, you're just bouncing up and down in your seat, not from airtime, but from just the roughness. I'm actually okay with rough rides if the airtime and the overall layout makes up for it, but in the Beast, it doesn't. The whole layout, it just moseys around the woods, which some people say is cool and it makes you feel like you're going really fast, which is true, but it does literally nothing. Every single hill where you think you're going to get airtime is trimmed to the core, so you don't get any forces or anything. The only good part of the ride, which will come later in this POV, does not make up for the rest of this crappy ride. The whole ride, you're just getting trimmed, and at one point, you almost come to a complete stop in the middle of the ride. Like, how does that make any sense? I really want to experience this ride at night because I've heard it's a great night ride, but so far I can't do that because it's in the summer and they only close at 7. Now I'm going to stop talking about all of the bad things about this ride and talk about the good things. For example, there is a lot of tunnels, which is really cool because it's super loud as you're going through them and it makes you feel the speed. Another good thing is the fact that this ride goes through the woods and completely away from the park. This is really cool because it makes you feel secluded, and just like the tunnels, as you're flying past the trees in the woods, you feel like you're going way faster than you actually are. The final good thing, which is what most people care most about, is the incredible length. This is in fact the longest wooden coaster ever built, and you definitely feel that. The ride never seems to end, and it's really crazy actually. There's 2 lift hills, which you usually only find in mine trains. We're going to the second lift hill right now, and after this comes the best part of the ride, which I'll explain once it happens. This is a super slow lift hill, so I'm going to speed it up a bit. Even at like 2 times speed, it's still super slow, but you'll just have to chug with me once we get to the top. At the top, you'll see the sign that says, "Do not stand up," and to keep your hands inside the car. This is when you know that something fun is going to happen. You make that left-hand turn, start going down that super shallow drop. This drop is pretty fun because you slowly build up speed. That's when the trim hits. But we'll forget about that trim for a second. Once you get to the bottom of the drop, you start going sideways, which is a super weird feeling. Then you go into a super intense double helix. This is by far the best part of the ride, and in this part, the roughness actually makes it feel more intense. Same with the super awesome tunnels. These tunnels make you feel like you're going way faster than you actually are, and it's an awesome experience. This is what makes the ride not terrible for me. After this helix, the ride is pretty much over, and you go into a dip and up into the final brake run. This ride overall, it's not terrible, even though I said quite a few bad things about it. I'm just not a fan. I don't understand at all how this could be someone's favorite ride in the park, but I'll just accept that and agree to disagree. Now let's move on. Next up, at the number 6 spot, we have Backlot Stunt Coaster. This is a Premier Rides family launch coaster, and it features 2 launches. I don't know what the top speed is, but it's not too fast. But it's still a pretty intense ride that pulls some forces, especially in that triple helix in the beginning of the ride. The rest of the ride is smooth and fun, with some awesome airtime in the back row. Or not really awesome airtime, but better than a lot of the other rides in the park. I would say that this isn't one of the best coasters in the world, but it's definitely a fun experience and a good fit for the park. Some people dislike this ride because it's a clone, because it's featured at King's Dominion and Canada's Wonderland, but I don't really care about that, because 1, I haven't ridden the other ones, and 2, it's a good clone, which is okay with me. The theming is also good, with all of the signs and buildings everywhere, and the inside section after the second launch, as you can see here, is really fun. 1, you have no clue what's going on. 1, because I'd never seen a POV of this ride, so I didn't know what to expect. Yeah, you don't know what's happening, because it's indoors. So yeah, fun ride. Now let's move on to the number 5 spot. At number 5, we have the Racer. This is a PTC racing wooden coaster that has 2 tracks, and it has a normal out and back layout with some fun pops of airtime and a nice drop. This is basically the border between Area 72 and the rest of the park. And when you're walking through the alley to get to Area 72, you see this ride because it goes over you. This has some fun airtime, but it's really janky airtime. Instead of just popping out of your seat, you're more of just bouncing out of your seat, which is a really weird feeling. Overall, this ride is actually pretty smooth, and I would recommend riding it at least once every time you go to the park, because it's a really fun ride, it's pretty smooth, and it's just a nice wooden coaster. I like Wild One at Six Flags America better than this ride, because that's the ride I would most compare it to, because it's an old Out and Back Woody. But I really don't understand the people that like Beast better. I know that's most people, and I know you're gonna hate me, but Beast is not better than this ride. It does literally nothing. I don't understand how you can enjoy going roughly in a straight patch of track. It just doesn't make any sense. But let's move on to the number 4 spot. This is when we start getting into the good stuff. At number 4, we have Banshee, a B&M inverted coaster. This is actually the fastest invert at 68 miles an hour, and even though it's shorter than Alpengeist, which is second place, it's still faster, mostly because it doesn't have a pre-drop. That's one part that I like about this ride. Drop is really fun because of the no pre-drop. After the drop, you go into a dive loop, which is pretty intense, then a inverted loop over the lift hill, which is really intense too, and it's a big element. Then you go into a perfect 0G roll. I love this element because it's just so smooth and awesome. Then you go into that pretzel loop, which is a one-of-a-kind element. This pulls some really good positive G's, and on the way back from the pretzel loop, you have some good near-miss elements in the front left seat. After this, you go into another loop. This loop is more intense than the first one, and I really like it. Then you do an upwards helix into my favorite part of the ride, the inline twist. This twist gives some awesome hang time, and it's one of my favorite elements ever. After that, you go into a really intense helix, which brings some positive G's. Then you go kind of S-bending into the brake run. Overall, this ride is awesome, and I love it to death. It's super intense, has excellent pacing, it's fast, and smooth. Some people complain about this ride's roughness and its rattle, and I will say the rattle is pretty bad in the back row, but if you sit in the front, it's not bad at all. My favorite seat is the front left seat because you get more intensity, more smoothness, and you get the near-miss elements throughout the ride. I love this ride, and I was trying to decide if it was better than Diamondback or not, but I decided that Diamondback was better just because the experience is more fun. But let's move on. At the number 3 spot, we have Diamondback. This is a B&M hypercoaster that's 230 feet tall with a 215-foot drop. This goes 80 miles per hour, and you definitely feel that throughout the ride. The ride has awesome airtime throughout this camelbacks in the beginning, and I would say that the beginning is better than the end. You get some very strong floater airtime going over those beginning camelbacks, and then you go into the turnaround in another camelback, and then the helix, and then after that the ride kind of dies. It's still fun, but the airtime isn't quite as strong. But near the end of the ride, or actually at the end of the ride, you go into an awesome splashdown effect. If you sit in the back row and you stick your hand out, you can actually feel the water splashing onto you. And the water, if you're sitting outside the ride, like just watching it, it's a huge splash and it's really awesome. But overall, this ride is super fun. I love it, but it's just not as good as the next 2 spots on this list. At the number 2 spot, we have the GCI Woody Mystic Timbers. This ride is really awesome, has great pacing throughout the whole ride, and the whole ride I was just yelling because it was so insane. The first time I rode in the very back row, and I was surprised by the smoothness. It's this super smooth ride, probably the smoothest wooden coaster I've ever ridden, and it was awesome. You get whipped down that first drop, which is one of the best parts of the ride. If you're sitting in the back, you get airtime and laterals at the same time, and it's one of my favorite drops in the park. It's really fun because the whole ride there's never a down moment. I don't think I would be able to do a review on this ride because I couldn't tell you which moments were the best and give you a breakdown on all of the elements because they're all the same. They're all so awesome. The whole ride I'm just screaming my head off until the brake run, and after the brake run you go into the shed. Some people hate the shed so much, but I don't really mind it. It's just some snakes screaming, and it's okay. I just think it was overhyped. They shouldn't have given it so much hype if they weren't going to really try that hard. I feel like people wouldn't mind if it was just like, if they just said that it was just a shed, but they said so much, they're like, it's what's in the shed? So that's why people were mad. But this ride is awesome. Let's move on to number 1, and I think you all know what number 1 is. At the number 1 spot, we have the B&M Giga Orion, the new for 2020 ride at the park. This ride is just awesome. In the back row, that drop is insane, but everything else is better than the front row. The ride begins with that 300-foot first drop. This drop is awesome, and you're just floating out of your seat the whole time, and you feel the speed. Then you go into this awesome wave turn. This wave turn doesn't give any airtime, but it's just a really weird feeling that you'll be wanting more after you ride it. Then you go into this turnaround. This turnaround is just okay, but it's still pretty fun. I wouldn't take it out. After this, you do a slight left-hand turn into the speed hill. The speed hill gives some awesome airtime, and it's one of the best parts of the ride. Then you go into a big Diamondback level camelback. This gives some Diamondback level airtime, and it's pretty good. Then you go into an awesome helix that gives some positive G's and makes you feel the speed. This is when you really know they are going super fast on a B&M Giga Coaster. Then you make a left-hand turn into this awesome twisted airtime hill, which gives some awesome airtime. It's really good airtime. Then you do another hill into the brake run. This ride is awesome, and I love it. It's the best ride in the park, and that was a pretty hard decision. Mystic Timbers is good, but it just is. So that concludes my top 10 coasters at Kings Island. I hope you liked the video, and if you didn't, well, that stinks. If you did like the video, however, then you can like, comment, and subscribe for more roller coaster content like this. Well, I hope you have a great day. I'll see you later on Flowjector Coasters.